Hi, my name is Clay, and I was watching the the flood of videos on the Facebook watch group for the survivors of the family school and the teen cult tough love industry. And I was a little bit sickened by my video. I made it last summer in India when I was doing a shitload of yoga and spiritual practice and seeing the Dali Llama, and at the same time an article had come out on the front page of the New York Times about the high rate of suicide of alumni from the school that I spent a year at as a teenager. The school, more like systematic psychological torture institution. And a couple, I think there's this part of me that's always been there and it's still part of me, but I saw it in that video. It's this part that wants to make it everything be okay. Like, everything's okay now. Like, I'm okay now. I've healed now. The pain is gone. I've forgiven. Like, tie it up and put it in the past. It's more convenient to have that be the narrative. It's convenient for the people who ran those institutions. It's convenient for my family, my parents. And at times it's felt convenient to me. But it's not fucking true. And it's funny how sometimes seeing myself be all smiley and positive and prayerful, which felt like the right choice to make at the time, it actually feels wrong. And the right thing to do feels to be raw, real, authentic, with the actual karmic, meaning the resultant residue of having been and spent time in that institution. And it's not needless to say, because everybody ends up under different circumstances, but I for sure ended up there because I also had parents who were my abusers. And while many can say, and many claim, and my parents claim that they didn't know what was going on when I was there, they did, because I ran away and I told them, and they didn't believe me. At one point, my second runaway, I was raped and then sex trafficked in New York City, because my mother told me that I could either go back to the school or I could be on the streets. And I chose the streets. I was 15. And I'd been a virgin before that first rape, and then subsequent rapes. And at the end of that period of being trafficked, I turned myself into my mother, who, only because she swore on everything that she'd bring me home and we'd find another solution than sending me back there. But when we got back to our home, their home, she said the escorts would be there within the hour to take me back. So I was completely betrayed, because I would have chosen to stay out on the streets and continue being trafficked rather than go back there. That's how severe the abuse was at this place. So I got up on the roof of our house and I threatened to jump. And it was the first suicide attempt that I ever made that wasn't real. It was just the only card I had left. They were blocking me in my room, saying the escorts are coming to take you away. I had no power, no rights, no voice. No one believed me. No one cared. They just wanted to shovel me off this place. So I got up on the roof, which caused them to, of course, call 911. And so I was, instead of going back to the school, I spent 30 days in a psychiatric hospital. And it was during that time in the psychiatric hospital that, well, first of all, I obviously had been raped and had been deeply sexually traumatized, so I was in pretty rough shape. I just remember I couldn't stop crying, and every time the doctor would come in to see me, I couldn't really talk to them because I just couldn't get the words out, because all I could do would, I'd try to tell them and I would just cry. And I remember every time the doctor with their pad would like write down the note to increase my medication. They were trying to drug me out of my grief. But at some point I was able to get it out, what had been happening at the school. And I remember the reason I was there. Usually if you're suicidal, you're not held for 30 days. You're held for like 3 days. But they were fighting with my mother because they didn't want this. The doctors, for what I was telling them, believed that the family school was abusive and was abusing me, and they didn't want to send me back, and they were trying to convince my parents to find another option. And I don't know what my parents told them, but after 30 days in a locked ward without windows that opened, without going outside, feeling like I was in prison, and being close to my 16th birthday, I agreed to go back and told myself that I would just run away again, or that I could survive it, because I had this time away to like strengthen myself mentally, and I had the plan of how I was going to survive it and fake it till I made it. So the forgiveness that I gave my parents in that video last summer, it was more like me desperately wanting to be at peace in myself, wanting to salvage a relationship with them. I'm 32 now, and I realize that relationship will never be saved. I'll never have the loving, trusting family that I wanted so badly. And maybe I would have been able to function in my particular family system. Excuse me, my nose is itching. Had they not perpetrated the horrific abuse of sending me to the school, I believe that fundamentally destroyed my trust at the deepest level in my family, and anyone in my family. And I think that's one, if not the greatest damage that the school did. It's not what happened to me there or what I witnessed, but it's the very fundamental betrayal of the most basic level of love and trust for my family to knowingly send me there. And there's a lot, for those who don't know, I've noticed when I've tried to talk about it, it's hard to talk about what happened there. It's like hard to name the things that actually happened. Like being forced to eat your vomit, force-fed, calling any girl with any degree of beauty a slut, a whore, cutting their hair in ugly ways, cutting off the bottom of your pants, making people run around like a horse trotting without shoes on, forced manual labor for 16 hours a day in brutally cold conditions, profound isolation for months, sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year. I saw somebody arrive at the school. I was in a physics class with this person, and he was really not well, and it was very clear he wasn't well. He was very down, and he should not have been there. None of us should have been, but it was clear he wasn't well. And over breakfast one morning, I watched his body fall from a balcony onto his head, and it splattered on the pavement, and he died. I saw kids cutting themselves out of desperation, sitting in the corner where they're forced to sit all day, every day, and being told to ignore it because they were looking for attention. Seeing kids being left in the corner all day with no one to call on them because you couldn't speak if you were in the corner. You had to raise your hand and wait, and sometimes nobody called on you, and I saw kids piss themselves, humiliated, sitting in a puddle of their urine and being told that they were asking for attention. And so much worse, the public shaming, like a stoning with words of any student who is gay or was suspected of masturbating, which I'm sure very few of the boys did, but there was like this conspiracy that people would claim that they heard them in the shower or they felt them in the bed above them, or it was basically bullshit. But they would shame these young men primarily, but also women, and they would make the girls in the group, which would be like 15 girls in a row, telling a boy how disgusting he was, how filthy he was, and then him being put on a sanction, meaning a punishment for months, where he could not make eye contact with any girls or initiate any kind of conversation. Neither could the girls with him. So if you imagine what this does to a young 13, 14-year-old psyche who's spending a year, 2 years, 3 years in these type of conditions, it can really fuck a person up. And it fucked me up. I think that one of the most painful things that I went through, just to name it, is I ran away, as I said, and was raped as a virgin. And it was so traumatic. I called my mother, first of all, the morning after I was raped, from the house where I was left alone in a puddle of blood. And I told her I'd been raped and please let me come home. And she said, you either go back to the family school or you stay on the streets. And I didn't know, there was no protection. The first time I ran away from the family school, the police illegally picked me up, put me in handcuffs, and brought me back. And I was there, my parents were paying for me to be there privately. I wasn't there under any legal for any legal purpose. They had no right. They didn't read me your rights. They had no right to arrest me, but they did. So there was, in my mind, no protection for me, and it broke my spirit. And it wasn't a conscious choice. I didn't say I'm gonna break my spirit now. It literally broke, and because of that, as I wandered on the streets of New York City, I attracted extreme predators who trafficked me sexually. And I thought that they loved me when they would give me food. I was so deluded that when a man used a condom, I thought that he really cared about me, that he must like me, that maybe he wanted to be my boyfriend, and he was a man who was fucking me for his own pleasure, like an object on a bed. It took so long, and it still is like the impact of that sexual trauma. It took so long, and I had to go through a fucking lot. Like a lot, you know how when you go through a trauma and then you end up like recreating things later in life that like kind of bring it back up so you can face it again. And like the amount of situations where I had to face like being with abusive boyfriends, being raped multiple times, joining a sex cult, when I first got out of the school, like being really promiscuous. I slept, like, I'm 32, and I'd say like 75% of the people and I've slept with over 100 people, and 75% of that was like in the year I left the family school. So that was the result of that trauma, and I had no support when I went back finally after the rape and it being institutionalized, and I went back to the school. And told them I had been raped, they put me up in front of the group and made me tell the story in front of 30, 40 people, and they called me a whore. And they had me write down the entire story. And this is where I'm coming to the point where it's like, that's not even the worst. This is the worst that I think one of the worst things I went through, which I didn't even really discover until years later, when I was visiting my parents a couple of years ago, and I found the document that I'd written while at the school describing the rape and the subsequent gang rape and then the trafficking. It was a 15-year-old. And they'd mailed it in an envelope to my parents. But they'd removed the first 3 pages in which I talked about being raped and gang raped. So they only included the part where I was trafficked, basically sleeping person to person. I was like squatting in a kind of like an underground, not squatting, I was kept in an underground basement apartment, like of a brownstone in the Bronx, where men would just filter in, coming in. So I was living there, being used as a sex object. And they shared that part with my family, but they took away the part where I said I'd been raped as a virgin, and then gang raped subsequently the next day by 6 or 7 men. So that is pretty horrific. That's pretty bad. In my family, in my actual blood family, we never talked about the family school. It wasn't allowed because they simply did not believe me. They said it to my face. They didn't believe me. So the pain of having to hear that from people who said they love me and care about me, it was too great. I just stopped talking about it because I couldn't bear that. And the one thing that was a blessing, the one thing that was the blessing of my life is that I never was an addict. I never became an addict, and I probably wouldn't have made it if I was. So I didn't get this, an addict gets to say, okay, now I've quit using drugs and I'm okay now. I never really got to have that moment. My experience of the trauma turned into other forms of self-destruction, with basically being able to have relationships, keep jobs. I have serious depression. I get suicidally depressed, and it's lasted for as long as a year, 6 months, before I start, the thoughts start going away. I've done a lot of different types of therapy, outpatient programs, some hospitalizations, ayahuasca. I spent 7 years meditating my ass off every day because it seemed like the only thing that I could do when I couldn't afford therapy, and I didn't have my shit together enough to even realize how desperately I needed trauma therapy, because I was just trying to survive getting through university and working life after that, and I just kept having these falling down into these severe depressions and not understanding why I couldn't stay steady. Now I'm 32 and I'm still living with the consequences. I'm still living as somebody who's trouble taking care of myself. I still talk to my family, I don't talk to my mother. I do talk to my father, but not a lot, and it's a very strained relationship. I don't talk to my sister. So I wouldn't say I'm estranged completely, but at a fundamental level, there's a severe damage that will never heal. I know never say never, but I don't think it will ever heal, because I think they really fucked up really bad, and they don't own it at all. And no matter how much I want to forgive them, it's like, how good is a relationship gonna be between a victim and their abuser? unless the abuser changes, it's never going to be an amazing relationship. So the two main ways I feel that the family school. Okay, so I left the family school, like many have said, my confidence destroyed, my dreams, my hopes gone, and I was so tough. I was quite a tough kid. I spent another year at another boarding school for really, that was also shut down for child abuse, actually, in New Mexico. A counselor was accused, apparently, of filling a pillowcase with bars of soap or oranges or something and beating a kid. Don't know if it's true or not, but the school never survived after that legal case was brought against it. It wouldn't completely surprise me if somebody snapped. But after that, and that school after the family school was a different type. It was also peer-to-peer based abuse. But there was really a different type of kid profile. These kids there was a girl who had an incestuous relationship with her father for 10 years. There was another girl whose older brothers, she was adopted, had been raping her, both of them, since she was 6 years old. There was a girl, and she ate her own hair and tore out her eyelashes and ate them. There was a girl who was almost like mentally retarded. There was another girl who was chronically homicidal and would try to kill people. Who knows what caused it, but basically what I'm saying is they were severe, and I was sort of lumped in with them as sort of the worst off. But yet again, no genuine therapy happening at all. And I think that those years where you're sort of building yourself up in your early 20s and you're discovering what your dreams are and you're going for them and you're laying the foundation for a future of success, those were, not only were the years I was at those schools taken from me, but it was the years after and the chaos that I kept creating around myself, desperately trying to address this wound that I didn't have the skills to address yet. And all those years that I could have spent developing myself and gaining professional skills, I was bouncing around place to place, commune, working on farms, a semester at a community college here, working as a waitress, doing it all really, until I kind of found myself in a breakdown point where I discovered Buddhism and meditation. And I took to meditation like my hair was on fire, because it was. My brain, my mind, my life was on fire. And at that point, besides being given medication, no type of therapy or talking about my experience, none of it had done anything for me. I was still going down to these depressions. I was still suffering. And meditation was a way of actually learning a little bit about how my mind works. And up until that point, I didn't know. I didn't really know how why my mind was the way that it was, why it was, how the trauma was playing out, how it was feeding itself like a cycle. Like I'd never been told, like for example, a very basic truth, like all phenomena is impermanent. I grew up in a reality in a very wealthy family where the goal was to get as much wealth as possible and hang on to your objects and revere these like the way that we coped in my family with difficult emotions was going on a shopping spree. It was like, let's go shopping and make ourselves feel better. It was searching for solutions to problems in a wrong, confused, incorrect way. And so Buddhism gave me this key to be able to open up something in myself. And for a long time it really helped me, but also in a fundamental way, because I discovered Buddhism quite soon before I started at a 4-year university. And I remember distinctly my first year of college realizing, because I was like around all these amazing, I went to a really cool school, and I was around all these amazing young people some of them had grown up in ashrams, some of them had already traveled the world, some of them were Mensa people. It was like a very small private for like freaks, freakishly interesting kids. And I remember thinking, how am I going to survive this? Like, my past is haunting me, like, all the time. And I remember consciously, I remember putting my past in a box in my mind, and I put it on a shelf. I don't know if I had read it in a book or someone had recommended me, but I like really consciously did it. It was like a very strong moment, and I put that on the shelf. And I kept going through university. I did a double major. I kept meditating. I kept practicing. I did a lot of meditation retreat. I did over a year and a half of retreat. But after I had a relationship that was 8 years. It went through college and afterwards. And when it ended, I had also had a sexual relationship during that time with my spiritual teacher in the Buddhist tradition. I ended that sexual relationship with my teacher. I ended my 8-year relationship. I left a community I was living in that was like an experimental sex community, and I moved into my own apartment, and I was working as a caregiver, and I stopped meditating, and I realized, like, I need to stop putting Band-Aid, or I need to stop like trying to be good, trying to put antidotes on my experience, and find out, like, at the base of these spiritual teachings, the base was like that we all have this Buddha nature, that we all have this pure nature, and I had to discover if it was true. So I sort of destroyed everything at an outward level, and I stopped my meditation practice, and it was like, whoop, all that trauma had been sitting there deep down, waiting for its chance to show itself and ask for help. And it really, really did. And unfortunately, you want to have this thing where it's like, well, then I got help and everything was better. And every step I've taken to get help and take healing has been good. And in some way, things have gotten better. But things were so broken at a very fundamental level that my psyche, my self-love mechanism, my self-care mechanism, my mechanism to have relationship and connection and love got pretty fundamentally broken, like, long before the family school. And so the healing that we're talking about, it doesn't happen overnight. It's like, and they say with addicts, it took you were an addict this long. You're not gonna switch like this. It takes time. And so here I am, 15 years after after the family school, still back in a depression. I hurt a lot less people, but in a certain way, it gets harder as I get older, because I start to see that I have this condition. You can talk about it however you want, but in some very undeniable way, I have a recurring condition of dark suicidal thoughts and long periods of homelessness and dysfunctionality, where the primary victim is myself. And it can't be denied, for whatever reason, despite all the antidotes I have applied, it reoccurs, and it gets more and more impossible to see things changing. But it also cannot be denied that there are plenty of stories of people who've gone through what I've gone through and worse, who have changed, and the mark for me of change, what I'm looking for, is to transform my own suffering enough to the point where I'm not consumed by it. I'm actually able to spend the majority of my energy serving, giving my gifts. It could be argued too that the world does not reward that type of intention. It rewards a very capitalistic, consumer-minded value system. And maybe I would never really, even if I hadn't gone to these fucked up places, and maybe fundamental part of my being was never going to be able to thrive in this type of society because its values are backwards, at least to mine. And one really can't change their core being, their values, their deep soul knowings. So it's a journey, it's a struggle, and this is my second time trying to record this video. I'm just gonna turn on a light here; it's getting dark. But I'd just like to say that I want to say to survivors, which is obviously I see you, I feel for you, but sometimes, as my case can attest to, sometimes we become the perpetuators of the trauma in one way or the other. And I feel like I have done that myself. I'm not saying I've been an abuser, but there's a way that I come to realize that in a sort of fundamental way, I treat the world like on face value as if it's my enemy rather than my friend. And that type of perspective can color other people's experience of you, of me. And I would not say abusive, but it's not always nice and not always really warm and not always very generous. And I guess what I'm trying to say is if you're somebody who is a survivor, but who's also become the person who seems to just keep causing hurt to yourself or others, I guess I just want to say I see you and I relate to that. You're not alone. And I'm not going to tie it up in some pretty bow and say, like, you're going to be okay. Suffering and struggle may be a part of your life forever. You may never be a success by our current standards of our society, but I think deep down, you know, when I met my first true healing friend who told me that being raped wasn't my fault. No one had told me that. The reason it felt so good is not just because it was kind of her to say, but because it was the truth. And the truth resounds deeply in people's souls. At least that's how I believe. And so what I want to say is that while we as survivors may have had trouble on the conventional level, that there's another type of success. And that type of success is being honest, being vulnerable, having compassion and empathy. And for someone who's been through the kind of stuff that we've been through, every minute step taken in the direction of having courage to try again, to not give up hope in a dark time, even if it's just distracting yourself from a negative action or self-harm, just for a moment. Those are the successes for us. And success does not mean that you forgive your abusers. In fact, I think it's one of the hardest parts, but that rage, that anger that got pushed against ourselves, it's not for us. And the world and the people who perpetrated these abuses, they're never gonna say, wow, I welcome your anger, I hear you, I appreciate you. But they are the correct object of the anger because they are the ones who harmed us. They are the ones who abused us. So anytime that you can remember to allow the anger but not turn it against yourself, that's a success. And it's not a linear path. It's not like success, now I'm okay. It's like success, sometimes down, success, down. And yeah, it's exhausting. And we did not come into these lives for it. We did not choose an easy way. We did not choose an easy path. Maybe outwardly we may have families who had money, or we could have, afford to go to university, but we did not come for the easy ride. And I know it's a cliche, and I know if you're a survivor, you've probably already been told it before, but you came because you had the strength. You had the strength to take such a path, and you had learning to do. I'm not saying that you deserved it. I'm saying we had learning to do. Like, part of my learning, obviously, I wish it wasn't so, is to fucking learn how to get up after falling. It's like that image of the guy rolling the ball up the hill. I forget his name, but the ball falls back and you just keep, I mean, what else is there to do? Commit suicide, be a drug addict, end up in a psychiatric institution. That's the better of the three. Or you chug along and you try to keep an open heart and you try to reach out for help and you try to forgive yourself for your mistakes and you hold that anger that's telling you that what happened wasn't right, and you protect it. You protect the rage. It's hard because a lot of us who were abused, that rage was invalidated, and we were told we were crazy for being angry. We were crazy for fighting back. And so I just feel like I feel protective of my own anger, and I feel protective of yours. And I also want to say, as a side note, I don't judge anyone or even have any judgment about people who choose to end their life. That may be an unpopular perspective, and it might be in conflict with people's religious beliefs, but I believe that there is mercy, that the universe is a merciful universe, that our souls lean towards the good and the merciful, and for those who are suffering deeply and choose to bow out of this life in whatever way that they are capable of, I send my love to those beings, those souls. I don't judge you, and I thank you for hanging in as long as you did. And in some way, the pain of losing you is a wake-up call for those of us still on the planet. And your death, doesn't have to be in vain necessarily. At least the survivors that I know, or those who've passed, your death is not in vain. We understand. Most of us can totally get why you did what you did. We don't judge you. We don't think you're weak. You get to choose when is enough. Enough is enough for you. We all have that choice. It's a sacred choice, and I honor it. I honor it in you. I honor it for myself, and at the same time, know that I still have room for growth, and I can do better, and particularly in the way around reaching out to other survivors who I know are struggling, or who I may not know are, but I know are survivors. I think that's one of the greatest beacons of hope, is having Miranda and Liz be voices in my mandala that represent powerful, wise women who, it's not like their pain or their burden is gone, it's completely there, but they've turned that corner in towards service, and which gives their life meaning, and they're beacons for me of inspiration. That's my long video. Yeah. Okay. I'm here on Facebook. You can, message me or reach out if you want to. Okay, I'm here. I see you. Bye-bye.